So episode 5, we are now past the halfway mark of this 8-episode season. And I did hear some positive remarks from a few people. And while I understand to a degree why maybe more lore focused people might find things to enjoy about it, man, this is just so hard to get through. It's almost torturous. It's so boring and slowly paced, and a lot of talking in dimly lit rooms, and the conversations too are not that engaging. And I actually kind of like shows that aren't action heavy, and I appreciate slow burn shows as well. I know that's not maybe the most popular thing when it comes to general audiences, but I actually do appreciate a slow burn story, but it really does depend on the characters and how intriguing and compelling that they are, and the different interchanges between them. And it has to be well written. And unfortunately, this is not the case. The conversations are not compelling. So I felt every one of those 60 minutes that this episode was. It was a full hour, and I felt it. It's so unfortunate. The quality is just not even there. Man, it's such a slog. And this is a problem with this show. One of the major problems. When a scene starts, I feel like we're missing something. We're missing context. So I think how this particular episode begins is there's like this celebration between Celebrimbor and his smiths and the dwarves. They're celebrating their friendship, I guess, their collaboration with the rings, and they unveiled the doors of Durin, and so there's that Easter egg there. But I feel like we're missing so much. Like, we just come into this episode, but where was this kind of friendship between Celebrimbor specifically and the dwarves? I feel like we're missing that. We didn't have any scenes with them together before this time, and he's famous for the friendship he has with the dwarves. And every time we move to another spot, so like in Numenor, when we go to Numenor, events just keep unfolding while we're in Eregion, and then when we jump to Numenor, we're just like flung into this story that I feel like we're missing the story. We're just kind of jumped back here, and we're missing the events that happened previously. While we've been in Eregion, Numenor's storyline has been going on, but we've been missing it. And now we're jumping back to Numenor, and all this stuff has already happened politically between Ar-Pharazôn and Tarmiriel. That's the impression that I get every time we jump to a new place, that we're just jumping around and we're missing the story. While we're in one place, we're missing the story that's happening in another place. And then when we jump back to that place, we're missing what happened. So I feel like we're having to play catch up with what just happened that we haven't seen, and kind of get our bearings as to what's going on. And yes, every scene is like that. Whenever we jump around, we've missed what's been going on. They're having to reestablish events that have transpired off screen. So we've had this whole like development, I guess, between Celebrimbor and the dwarves off screen. We've had also stuff going on in Numenor, where I guess Ar-Pharazôn, he has the scepter now. We just went from them chanting his name with the eagle thing to now I guess he's in charge. And we're just missing so much that's transpired off screen. And it's so jarring every time we're in a new spot. And it's just so that the showrunners can just get to the good stuff, but they forgot to actually tell the story. It's very inaccessible. It just breaks immersion every time. It's Days of Our Lives, but with worse writers. It's not good, but at the same time, it amuses me when I'm not bored. Yeah, I mean, it's fun to talk about it, to rant about it, but when I'm watching it, it's such a slog to get through. I feel like my brain cells are dying. And yeah, it's very much plays like a soap opera. In particular, with the Numenor storyline and the Annatar Celebrimbor dynamic. They interact like they're a couple. Annatar, I can't roll my R's, so I can't even say it like they do with the extra R's. Annatar. I don't know why they do that. It's intentional, the exaggerated rolling of the R's, but every time someone does that, and they just pick and choose which words to do that for, rolling the R's, It takes me out every time. It's so silly. They've made it ridiculous. And anyways, so yeah, Anatar and Celebrimbor, their dynamic plays off very soap opera, and they play it like they're in a relationship, and Anatar is using like his a very passive aggressive kind of mean girl energy, like he's trying So they're at the celebration, and while they're celebrating and while Celebrimbor is talking and making his speech, Anatar leaves, kind of making the moment about him and getting Celebrimbor's attention. Like he sees him leave, and then it makes him go to him, and they have their little scene, just the two of them, and him asking like what's wrong. And the way it plays out is so, I use the word cringe a lot, but because there's no other word to describe it, it's really cringe. And this is not the master manipulator that I envisioned for Anatar. And the way that Celebrimbor is, especially, he comes across as feeble, weak-minded, and just so taken in by Anatar's, Sauron's very simple attempts to get at him. It's very like passive aggressive little comments. This is just such mean girl energy. The writing is horrendous. Yeah, it's generic fantasy with a Tolkien skin, badly done. And their conversation, so when they're talking about rings for men, this is why he went off, and Celebrimbor goes to him because he's like, he's got to find out what's wrong, why Anatar is in a tizzy, why he's in a bad mood. He's got to figure out what's up. So he's like brings up the rings for men, and they have their little tiff debating about men and them being easily corrupted or something like that. He doesn't like men. Men are in the state that they are because of themselves. Basically what Celebrimbor was saying. And so they're having a little tiff about the rings for men. And then there's things that Anatar mentions. Talks about the bravery of men. He mentions several names. And so if you're familiar with the lore, you'd recognize, so it's like Easter eggs. You'd recognize some of those names. And one of them was Baron, son of Barahir. When Anatar's like, oh, they're good men, they're brave men. And he mentions like several. And hearing him say those names, it just annoyed me so much. Really just sums up this whole show and the problems at its core, which is they have the rights to names and places and certain events that are in the appendices, but they don't have the rights to tell these stories. They don't have the rights to say why Beren is so brave, and they don't have the rights to tell the Second Age story with the Rings of Power and the fall of Numenor. So they're just reimagining it and doing so in such a juvenile fashion, not nuanced, not compelling. And it's just not good writing at the end of the day. So it's these inexperienced showrunners' fan fiction of it. Like y'all were saying, it's like a soap opera fan fiction, Tolkien with a Middle-earth skin. When he was saying those names, and we hear that a lot. We hear bits of lore, just like Easter eggs of it, rather than just telling a story. And I was thinking that, what does this mean to just your average viewer, your general audiences? They're not going to connect with just a list of names. So just tell the story. Have the dialogue be what it is. If you're trying to make the case for men, well, do it in a way that's not just going to be half of a lore dump. That's not going to connect with people. And people are going to be like, okay, a bunch of names. And they think that that qualifies as storytelling, just listing off and just filling it with references and Easter eggs, as opposed to just telling the story. You can really feel how much they're relying on it instead of just writing dialogue and thinking of character motivations and a meaningful character arc that makes sense and getting the audience to care about your characters. That's the most important thing. And while I'm certain there would be people that appreciate those little references, but you can't rest the whole show on that.